This episode of the Majority Report is brought to you by the civic engagement podcast Future Hindsight. Join host Mila Atmos this week as she sits down with Colin Jerolmack, author of Up to Heaven and Down to Hell. They discuss the impacts of fracking on small town communities, how this form of gas extraction actually hurts our democracy and civic life. It's available wherever you get your podcasts or at futurehindsight.com. Now for this show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, May 14th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, President of the U.S. Middle East Project, Daniel Levy, will be joining us. Also on the program today, Noah Culwin, co-creator of the podcast Blowback. Meanwhile, violence continues as the U.S. blocks a UN discussion on a ceasefire. As of yesterday, 49 new Palestinian deaths. CDC, I should say civilian deaths. CDC issues new recommendations. Fully vaccinated may go without masks in all but a very few places. However, mask mandates remain in place in many Democratic states as they reevaluate. Ron Wyden reveals the DOD is surveilling Americans without warrants. Project Veritas, former spy, and Eric Prince mounted a special operations aimed at Trump enemies in the Trump administration. And I was able to say that entire sentence without laughing out loud. Republican congressman from Colorado sued by a former staffer after turning his congressional office into essentially a COVID petri dish. Meanwhile, a group of leading scientists call for a proper investigation into the COVID origins, cite the possibility of a lab leak. Republican-led states plan to cut employment benefits for nearly 2 million Americans. And lastly, the Missouri voters passed a Medicaid expansion. And its Republican governor says, so what? All this and more on today's Majority Report. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Joining me as always, Emma Vigeland. Emma, how are you today?
It's Friday and it's nice here. It's nice out.
It is very nice. 60s. It feels like the beginning of summer, or like deep into spring. It's been a little chilly for spring.
Yeah, and so because we are New Yorkers, we can never be fully happy. This is like the only time of the year. There's probably around 6 weeks total where we can be happy about the weather. And then as soon as it hits June, it's way too hot to be in the city and we'll go back to complaining.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd like to think that I complained in all the places I've ever lived. So
it's poetic.
I maintain that consistency. There today on the program is a slight a deviation from our typical format. Usually we have a commentator on to just discuss broadly the week in review. But this week we have Daniel Levy on. I have been talking to Daniel Levy about Israel specifically in terms of its treatment of Palestinians and the potential for any type of peace for well over a decade. And so wanted the opportunity to talk to him and get his perspective on this. He was involved in the Oslo peace accord negotiations. I think he is a slightly jaundiced view of some of those negotiations, but nevertheless, he has a great insight. He will be joining us shortly. But before we get there, there's a couple of dynamics that are going on that are, I think, in some ways, somewhat unique in terms of this round, if you will, and I don't want people to misunderstand me when I say round, because obviously there has been ongoing suppression of the Palestinian people and their rights for decades. But there are moments where at least in the context of the United States, it becomes a news item. It is pegged on some events, a new round of violence, extreme violence, and this is one of them. And what is unique about this a moment are two things, it seems to me. One is what is happening within Israel proper. There are many people, commentators in Israel, and of course we're not there, so it's hard to assess. But certainly from this distance, it looks different. There is what some people argue is like what could be like a burgeoning civil war within Israel. The Israeli Arab population is somewhere around 20 some odd %. And for the most part, Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews have lived together in, there's been a peaceful coexistence within the country. I'm sure there are incidences, but
within the country is key, because that 20%, like the 700K odd Palestinian Arabs, that's distinct for our viewers from the occupied Palestinians.
Yes, we're not talking about the occupied territories. I'm talking about actual folks who presumably have Israeli citizenship and the rights are afforded to them in that regard. They're Israeli citizens, and they're living within Israel as opposed to the occupied territories. And there have been reports all throughout the country of acts of violence between Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis. There have been mob violence, right-wing Jewish groups that have, we talked about this yesterday, smashed the windows in some Palestinian-owned businesses. It has gone, both directions in terms of the violence, but there is which is not to say that they're equal. I'm not equating them. I'm just simply saying there is growing violence there, and there is, some commentators are saying, like, this is how you get to a civil war. And the other thing that is unique, it seems to me, in this instance, Ryan Grimm had a piece that captured this yesterday in The Intercept, that we are seeing more prominent elected voices in this country, primarily in the Democratic Party, who
singularly in the Democratic Party.
Well, singularly, I mean, I'm just thinking back if there's ever been like a Buchanan Republicans who really didn't like Israel, but more because of the Jewish problem.
The Jewish element. I mean, Bush, I guess, in 2001 sort of pushed back, and Biden was to the right of him, actually, when you look back on Israel. But I mean, generally, of course,
I'm not sure about that, but but we could talk about that. Maybe in that moment, I'm not sure, but be that as it may, the real point is that you have many voices, or at least some voices, and prominent ones in the Democratic Party speaking out on behalf of Palestinian rights this time around. Here is Ilhan Omar, and there was we saw a speech on the floor from AOC. We saw a speech on the floor from Rashida Tlaib that was incredibly moving. She and Tlaib is Palestinian. Here is Ilhan Omar calling out the United States for blocking a UN ceasefire request.
Defending Israel's airstrikes against civilians under the guise of self-defense, without even a mention of the children getting killed, much less what happened at Al-Aqsa or in Shirjara. When the 15-member United Nations Security Council proposed a resolution this week calling on the Israeli government to cease settlement activities, demolition and eviction, and urging general restraint, the United States reportedly blocked it from happening. We are currently blocking the United Nations Security Council from calling on ceasefire. And to this day, we as members of Congress have not had yet a hearing or a briefing on this conflict, or gotten answers on whether our weaponry or money is being used to commit human rights abuses. So I must ask, when we defend Israeli citizens' right to peace and security, how can we at the same time ignore the 5 million Palestinians living under occupation? When we say that Israel has the right to self-defense, how can we ignore the home demolitions, settlement violence, and forced annexation of Palestinian land that is happening? And how can we say they themselves do not have the right to defend themselves? How can we pay lip service to a Palestinian state yet do absolutely nothing to make that state a reality while the Israeli government we fund tries to make it impossible? I will end with this. Today is Eid, the final day of Ramadan, one of the joyous days in the Muslim calendar. And while I would rather be spending it with my family, I know there are families who are mourning the death of their children because of this. And I owe it to them to speak out on their behalf. So I am here today to stand for our common humanity, to say that every child deserves a life free of violence and oppression. Every child deserves advocates for their humanity.
I mean, it's this is a change that exists, and it is a hopefully a trend. But what the administration is doing, we'll talk more about with this Daniel Levy. What the administration is doing by holding off on any calls for a ceasefire or any conversations at the UN is essentially, I mean, let's be very clear on this. It is to give the Israelis time to do as much damage as possible. That is it. There is no other explanation for this whatsoever. And they know, and you can see it as this develops, they know that every day goes by, the ledger of Palestinians killed goes up at a much, much faster rate than any casualties that Israel will suffer or any type of physical damage, right? I mean, they're going in to take out any progress that has happened in Gaza in any infrastructure, whether it's energy or food or whatever it is. That's what the agenda of the Israelis is. It is to punish the Palestinian civilian population.
It is to discipline them as well. How dare you demand that you have rights? How dare you demand that you have access to electricity, to clean water? How dare you demand some form of statehood that isn't completely under our thumb? How dare you retaliate when we, on 2 consecutive days, storm one of the holiest places when you're worshiping for a holiday, the Alaska mosque. How dare you have a response to that? No. You are supposed to be our subjects and nothing more. And that's exactly the response, and the United States is abetting it. They are blocking the United Nations, as of yesterday, their call for a ceasefire to give Israel more time to kill more children, more civilians. Yesterday was the bloodiest day. Now the death total is over 100. It varies, but at least 27 children have been killed. And just to remark on Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, I doubt we'll get to it right now, but I would encourage everyone to watch her full speech. She cried. Her and Ilhan Omar are two of the most remarkable people in Congress, specifically on this issue right now, based on the fact that they were both the two first Muslim women to be in Congress, and they have that lived experience. Rashida Tlaib is Palestinian. Ilhan Omar obviously is a refugee. So just treasure the fact that these two people are able to be given voices in government, however marginalized they are by the media and by the rest of their colleagues.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. When we come back, we'll be talking to Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project. Folks, this show today is sponsored by SunsetLakeCBD.com. You've heard me talk about them many, many times before, but I want to highlight this. One of the things that, I really do. I use their product daily. Just about daily. 5 times a week, I'm trying to get to sleep with the tincture, and I use the Solve, and I'll occasionally use the smokable. But the thing that I really appreciate about these guys is that they are they're what I call a movement sponsor of this show. They were fans of the program, but they're up there running their business in about as good of a way as you can in the context of capitalism. You take that for what you want, but they have mostly employee owned. They pay a minimum of $15 an hour. Their farming practices, no pesticides, integrated pest management, regenerative farming practices, all of that is great. But they do stuff like this, which is really great. One of the executive director, a guy named Sam, wrote to my sister, and who helps us with advertising and whatnot. And she says, hi, I hope you're well. Just want you to let you know there's a nurses strike going on in St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts. Now, I don't know that they know this, but my sister was actually born there. And the nurses have been on strike since March 7th. We've talked about this. It's going into day 50. They are demanding adequate staffing levels, essentially, for patient safety. There were 600. They filed 600 notices of problems with patient safety over the course of the last year. During that year, the hospital owner, it's a Texas hospital conglomerate, Tenet Healthcare, made over $400 million in profit. They have made $97 million in profit this quarter. Nurses are on strike for better safety protocols for their patients. Tenet just announced yesterday that they're going to bring in permanent scabs for these nurses. There's about 700 that are on strike. And Sunset Lake has donated $2,500 to the Nurses Strike Fund. They want to encourage MR listeners to help if they can. We have put the link on, I put it up on Twitter. We'll put it in our podcast description. It is a bit.ly link, bit.ly/ST for St. Vincent Nurses. But you can find that on our link. Donate something. They're going to need support, as Tenet says that they're bringing in permanent scabs. But this is the type of company they are. Their product is great. They just sent me a lotion I don't know how much I'm going to use it. I'm not a lotion guy. I use the Solve, but if the lotion works like the Solve does on some of my dry skin, then I'm into it. But check it out, sunsetlakecbd.com. If you use the coupon code Left is Best, they will give you 20% off of anything, the gummies, the CBD coffee, the CBD fudge. It's a great company. And also support the nurses. A very important strike, 700 of them. And there's a whole story behind, and maybe I'll talk about it at another point, about the merger of for-profit hospital companies and Catholic hospitals. That is worth talking about. Also, this program is sponsored today by Hello Tushy. They have written this copy. I am not reading this. Despite the fact, masks off and there's all
wait, is this the copy you read to me before?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Everyone brace yourselves.
No, I'm not going to. I'm not going to. I'm not going to say that part of it. I'm just not going to. But I mean, people can use their imagination. They like to get edgy, but the bottom line is the Hello Tushy 3.0 modern bidet attachment is a hit. Some people were on it on Twitter the other day saying how much they love it. It is stylish. It is eco-friendly. It is easy to install. It saves you cheap ass money. As they say, Hello Tushy 3.0 doesn't just clean your butt with a precise stream of fresh water. It cleans itself with the smart spray automatic nozzle. It attaches to your existing toilet. You don't need any electricity. You don't need any extra plumbing. You cut your toilet paper use by 80%. It pays for itself in a few months. Much less expensive than you imagine. Bidets can be thousands of dollars. This is not even close. Plus, Hello Tushy has you covered with a 60-day risk-free guarantee and a 12-month warranty. You join millions of happy Hello Tushy customers right now. Clean your butt with every flush. Folks, it is a life-changing experience to switch to a bidet. Trust me on this. Go to hellotushy.com/majority for 10% off plus free shipping. This is a special offer for Majority Report listeners. Go to hellotushy.com/majority for 10% off. hellotushy.com/majority. All right. I want to welcome to the program, or back to the program, President of the US Middle East Project, Daniel Levy. Daniel, it is great to see you again. I'm here with Emma Vigeland. Thanks for coming.
Really good to see you, Sam. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Daniel.
So here we are again. We have had conversations. I was telling the audience early, probably over the course of, I don't know, the past 10 or 15 years. And on this, each time we talk, it seems more and more intractable. I am struck, and I read the piece that you wrote about Biden's old playbook. Will not end the violence going on there. Let's talk about that. But then I want to talk about a couple of other sort of, I think, fairly new developments in the context of this, both what's happening internally in Israel and what's happening in the US Congress. Both those things seem very different. But let's start with what Biden is doing. There are many reports that his administration is standing in the way of the UN trying to issue a call for a ceasefire. Give me a sense of what you think Biden wants to do, is doing, and what's problematic about it.
I mean, look, first, you said something in those comments, Sam, which I think is interesting and that we shouldn't lose sight of through this conversation. And you said that each time we talk, with heights of several years, but it gets more intractable. And that's important because that is part of the problem, that each time after a period of neglect, people go, oh, it's blown up again. We've got to wrap our arms around this. We are doing so where the circumstances and conditions have further deteriorated. The ability to intervene effectively and the nature of the outcome one could achieve suffer from a diminishing return with each iteration. Now, I think the Biden administration came into office hoping that this would be an issue that they could back burner for as much as, if not all, of this term. And although the issue, I wouldn't argue for it to have priority, but they should know better because they've been there before. And they know how that if you don't get ahead of the curve, this has an explosive potential. And then given the extent of American equities in this issue, and given the way this plays out in American politics, it's gonna be very time consuming. So I understand that there is going to be inconsistency and hypocrisy in how America conducts itself in different parts of the world. There is going to be one standard that one applies to Chinese treatment of the Uyghurs, and there's going to be another standard that one applies to Narendra Modi's BJP regime and how it treats folks in Kashmir. However, an administration that has so pinned its colors to the mast of America is back, and being back means democracy, values, norms, international law. Do you really want to be so out on a limb when it comes to Israel's treatment of the Palestinians? And so I would like to see an administration that appreciates, number one, that there is a place on the spectrum between maximum pressure and maximum impunity. You know, it's not a binary. You can look at Israel and say, you know, we're not putting you in that category. But maximum impunity has had a terribly distorting impact on the Israeli internal discourse and debate and the politics. And if you want to start getting this right, you have to introduce elements of accountability into how you relate to Israel and into that bilateral relationship. And secondly, give some breathing space in the multilateral fora. So there's things you can do in your bilateral relationship, and then there's things you can stand aside and not prevent in multilateral fora. Now, a UN call for a ceasefire, the statement that was prevented by America, in and of itself, isn't going to change everything. But the political signal you send,
right,
by preventing it versus not preventing it, that's where the Israelis go, oh, good, it's business as usual, we can get away with anything.
Well, Sam mentioned it, and then you expanded upon how intractable the situation's become, right? And it gets more so with every passing year. Can you expand upon how these political choices, like the one we're seeing with Biden attempting to halt this UN call for a ceasefire, and just the knowing message that sends, the green light that it gives to Joe Biden, to Israel and Netanyahu, how that has contributed and how it almost seems to have exponentially escalated over the past few decades, the frequency with which we encourage this behavior.
Yeah, and I would also throw into the mix that it was on steroids during the Trump administration. So, first of all, you're not starting from point zero. You're dealing now with an Israel that is testing the water on just how different from the egregious excesses of Trump this next period is going to be. And you have to wrap your head around, there's no, as you both implied, there's no status quo ante. There's no pre-Trumpian golden era where America was getting this right that you can return to. And I do, look, let me first of all say that Israelis, and especially Israel as the occupying power, but Israelis and Palestinians, even as an occupied people, they carry primary agency and primary responsibility, not the US. But I would, with great confidence, assert that American policy has a huge shaping influence on the parameters of the politics, especially in a polity like Israel. So in that respect, I think Israel not only got used to the idea that there was zero accountability, that there are no costs or consequences for whatever you do to the Palestinians. And given that, first of all, if you're a right-wing Israeli who believes in greater Israel, believes the Palestinians have no place there, who increasingly articulates this position, by the way. You had a member of Knesset who was a member of Netanyahu's government. If Netanyahu forms a government again, will be again. Bezalel Smotrich stand on the podium of the Knesset the other day and talk to the Arab members of Knesset and say, you guys are here for now. Palestinian Israelis are here for now. Threatening expulsion, which of course the Palestinians have had in the past. So that's, if you're on the right, this is fabulous. It's cost-free. If you believe that, this isn't going so well, we need to treat the Palestinians with some respect, some dignity, permanent occupation isn't ultimately going to work out well for us, then that's going to be really difficult. Internally, that's going to be a huge fight. If you can simply carry on and say, you know what, we can postpone that because there's no cost. Again, there's no cost or consequence, then it makes it so much more difficult to shift the dynamics in Israel. But I would say that I think, at least, irrespective of what Biden does almost, something very important has changed in the last few days. And I think it's the implosion of the concept that took deep root under Trump, which is as follows. I think the Israeli political class, across much of the spectrum, starting with the right though, began to start believing in their own PR BS. And the narrative, the mantra was, the Palestinians, you still talk about those guys? That's yesterday's story. Nothing's going to happen with them. We've got this under control. You're talking from anachronistic talking points. The Arabs have accepted us. We've got peace with the Emiratis and with others. The Palestinians are eventually just going to have to accept whatever we give them. And those are going to be terms of surrender that will be dictated to them. I think that imploded in Israeli faces in the last days, not only what we've seen out of Gaza, which is very significant in terms of the rocket fire, but what we've seen inside Israel with the unbelievable unrest on the streets of towns and villages with Jewish extremist mobs, often backed by the power of the state, confronting Palestinian protesters, what we saw in Jerusalem, which led up to this. So, and today, by the way, things have spread to the West Bank. People have approached the border with Jordan. So I think the concept of the right has faced a challenge and has crumbled in ways that I didn't think we would see so quickly, which is good news. The question is, does this administration, from an American perspective, does this administration use that as an opportunity to revisit some things?
Just so that we have a historical context. I mean, it seems to me that we've had sort of like this this degradation of the United States role. And look, yes, the primary agency lies with the Israelis and the Palestinians, and of course, with that, with the qualification that the Israelis are clearly in the driver's seat here, right? I mean, they have all of the power, and it seems to me the United States has two obligations, obviously, or three. I mean, obviously, just sort of the sheer moral one. But A, we contend that we want world leadership. This is where if you're going to put yourself into that arena and make that claim, then you've got to take that leadership. And B, we fund the Israelis to nearly $4 billion a year. And plus, I would say there's even, it goes beyond that. We have 35 states in this country, which you cannot teach in a public school if you participate in a boycott and divestiture movement. That is obscene in and of itself, regardless of what the country is. But we have all of these other built-in sort of like non-dollar value that we are protecting. And what we're doing is we are basically enabling Israel's worst impulses. It started, it seems to me, with the Bush administration in terms of basically just, I have no doubt that there was some vestige of that during the Clintons, et cetera, prior to that. But it was really the Bush administration, which became like more of instead of being a ballast for to stop the Israeli excesses, it became a sort of a force to push in that direction. And Obama did not do enough to rein that back in. Trump, as you say, put it on roids. And now we have a country that is like, they may not be being fed steroids by the United States, but they are still roided up. And for Biden to come in and assume that they can announce, we're not going to do anything here, and this wouldn't allow this to happen. To me, it seems like an incredible miscalculation. I mean, this is assuming the best of intentions by the Biden administration, which, I don't know what's in their minds. But this was a huge miscalculation, even from their own desire to not have this become an issue, because Netanyahu was going to do this. So let's talk about the other changes that you referred to in your piece, which is because now this turns to like, how do we influence the Biden administration to influence the Israeli government? Or how do we influence our government to influence the Biden administration? And you talked in your piece about the sort of, there are two, distinct problems for this Democratic administration. You stated one, which was the idea of like, you're trying to project to the world that you're not Trump, but yet here you are doing nothing for the mess that Trump, encouraged. Again, United States not the primary agent here, but you're not doing whatever it is that we can do within our realm of possibility. The other is a more sort of like domestic political issue. Will you discuss that? Because we started with a clip from Ilhan Omar at the beginning of the show, but we could see Rashida Tlaib, we could see AOC, we could see, on Cori Bush. There are people speaking out in Congress like we haven't seen in this country ever.
I mean, first, I just feel that my steroids analogy was really inadequate after where you took it. So I'm going to double down on it like you did last time. This is fascinating to me, and as someone who's worked in this for a long time, and I'm constantly trying to check myself and not get carried away, because it feels like the shifting of an Overton window in terms of how this is being dealt with inside the US. And yesterday felt really consequential. The speeches that you've just referred to, the session in Congress, you could usual suspects, all the rest of it, but they weren't there saying the kinds of things that those folks said yesterday, saying them without fear. Some of those folks had already been reelected, having had a target put on their backs. And I literally had to pinch myself reading an item in the Times, in the New York Times this week, about Andrew Yang's candidacy for the mayoralty, how he had to retract and rephrase himself on Israel-related stuff because he had gone too far in ignoring the Palestinians, in asserting a singular right to self-defense and to security for Israelis. And this is the centrist candidate for mayor of New York. So, if you want an indication of how this is shifting. Now, that's where I pause. This hasn't come out of nowhere, as you know, Sam. This has been movement building. This has been people working to de-exceptionalize Palestine, including in progressive spaces. This has been groups coming out of the Jewish community as well, saying we have to talk about this. We have to take this into the progressive community and support folks. And there's a range of those. So you've got JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, who are absolutely in this BDS racial justice space. You've got If Not Now, which is an insurgent group, younger generation. These are, to the extent to which JVP were always considered to be, you're Jewish when you criticize Palestine, when you criticize Israel, when you talk about Palestine, which I think was a harsh thing to say about those folks in the first place. But if not now, these are often the kids of the macharocracy, of those who've been deeply involved in Jewish life, to have said, wait a minute, you brought me up with all of this stuff? That's not what it looks like to me. You sent me on this Israel trip. I've come back questioning all of this. And they've gone out and they've challenged who should be the anti-Semitism envoy. They've raised this issue as a JVP of conditionality of aid. And you've got J Street, which at the time didn't really have much to its left. But now it's kind of occupies that center space. And J Street came out supporting a bill put forward, initiated by Betty McCollum, about restricting the uses of American aid and assistance to Israel. And it's not going to accumulate a majority of members of Congress. It's not going to get passed as a bill. We're not there. But we see a shifting discourse. There is constituency, and there are members of Congress who are responding to that. And the question is how far and how fast it goes, and whether the attempts of the other side are going to be effective in blocking those advances, and how many assists Israel is going to give. Because the other interesting phenomenon is that Israel keeps providing assists to this camp. It provided a huge assist when the Israeli leadership under Netanyahu decided, to hell with bipartisanship. I'm an ideological fellow traveler of Republicans. I'm an ideological fellow traveler of Trump, of the alt-right. We believe in a version of ethnic nationalist supremacism. We've got our natural allies over there. By the way, we have natural allies in Hungary with Viktor Orban and elsewhere. Let's partisanize this issue. Let's polarize the issue. And Democrats, not just the folks we've just been talking about, but Democrats would do well to smarten up and not allow this to be a divisive issue used against them by groups like the so-called Democratic Majority for Israel, by the Republican side. So the question is how effective the pushback would be. And you referred to one element of that pushback, which has been the attempt to criminalize criticism of Israel, criminalize BDS, and to weaponize anti-Semitism in ways that do a deep disservice and injustice to the actual fight against anti-Semitism. That made great progress. I see that also being effectively pushed back against. There was a statement put out by some of the most preeminent scholars of Jewish studies, contemporary Jewish history, anti-Semitism studies, just a couple of weeks ago, called the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, which categorically protected free speech around Palestine and Israel issues, and went against this so-called definition of anti-Semitism, which has attempted to criminalize BDS.
I'm sorry. Let me just want to follow up on this, because we had Nora Erekat on the program earlier this week, and she was talking in a way that I have that sounded new to me in terms of framing the relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and in a way that comes out of, it seems, or at least is available, because there's a greater understanding in this country of the dynamic of white supremacy, of issues involving policing and the perception of the of a an intersectionality, if you will, on some level. And it seems to me that the framing of the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians, and I'm like, and maybe this has always gone on, but when I hear discussion of this in the news, it is, I listen to the radio news for AP News just to hear how it's being, like, what is the top line elevator pitch that they're making in terms of the news. And it's always Israel striking Hamas, as if Hamas was a place, as if Hamas was it is always, you don't hear Hamas is striking the Israeli government, right? Or the Israeli defense. It is Israel is hitting Hamas, as opposed to Israel is raining bombs on Palestinians. And there seems to be a consciousness now that, and again, we're all talking just like all rhetorically, right? There's no policy around here. This is all just sort of like foundational stuff that we're hoping will develop on it. But from a foundational perspective, this is I think a language and a rhetoric that at least broad swaths of the American public understands now, where you're talking about like this is a form of white supremacy that we're seeing. And, it's not exactly like the way that it plays out in America, but the dynamics are exactly the same. And that, except for it's far more brutal in some respects at this moment for the Palestinians. And I wonder if that is, how you see this is like, from just a societal perspective, like there's a broader understanding, like even on Twitter, right? Like you have Palestinian voices on Twitter that just are not, the pushback is not the same. When I share these things on Twitter, I don't hear from the same people I used to hear. It just feels like there is a sea change that is happening, at least on the center to the left. And part of that is using Donald Trump as the fulcrum. Part of it is, I think, like this new awareness of this dynamic of white supremacy, and also just the ability to see these images of like, Israeli cops busting into a Palestinian home and just beating people so that they can get these homes for an Israeli settler. This is it just seems like there's a sea change here that we have yet to see it. The implications of it.
I think it's such an important insight by Noah, Erica, that because I think she's onto something, that it does feel that the leap forward in how the issue is discussed in America, it does feel derivative of a conversation that Americans have been having in an unprecedented way. It does feel that it took that wrapping one's head around racial justice and racial injustice and what it means, what white supremacism means, in order to better understand the Palestinian predicament. And this is where the blue chip Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, this is the case they have made in a recent report where they have come out and said, this is one regime of Jewish supremacy across the entirety of Israel and the lands it controls. And Human Rights Watch, the kind of global blue chip organization, came out and made the designation of Israel committing the crime of apartheid just last month. And, in that context, to be on the wrong side of that issue as a Democrat should matter, and it may well begin to have sufficient constituency to matter and to exact a price. And so, I co-authored a report that we put out as US MEP and Carnegie a few weeks ago, which called for a rights-based approach. And I think centering these kinds of issues is the way to, as you say, it's foundational. It's shifting discourse, it's shifting narrative. The policy prescriptions are out there, but we'll come to those. Some of them may be more low-hanging fruit. We'll come to those. And, I would just say this as well. I've lived in Israel. I took Israeli citizenship. I'm a dual national. I worked in the government there. It pains me to see how far things have gone in a negative direction. And I don't see how my friends over there who are working from this angle to change things, real change, deep fundamental change, I don't see how they make enough progress in doing that until the people they're trying to convince say, okay, we don't agree with you, but why are people suddenly ganging up on us? Why is this suddenly exacting a price in terms of what we thought was, everyone accepted it. We thought this was a perfectly acceptable way of going about. And then I think there might be openness for a conversation.
In other words, there needs to be an intervention. I mean, people need to be sat down and basically said, like, you're off the rails. And the only way to indicate that is through things like BDS or the US government saying, hey, we're not funding this anymore.
Yeah, and holding them, you're held accountable, you're called out on it. Where America directly contributes to it, it pulls back from that contribution. Where there is legitimate criticism in an international fora, that goes ahead without an American veto. And going to a riff that you were on earlier, it's, of course, it's easy to come out and condemn your adversaries. You're only on the line when it's the folks who are your allies, who you fund, who are doing wrong. And then what do you do? That's the test case. That's whether you're walking the walk of America, claiming it has a certain role on the international stage, or are you just bloviating?
You know, several years ago, I would get into fights, email chains with. Well, I do that with a lot of people, but specifically, it was a guy, an American Jew who, had whose position on Israel was like, many American Jews, regardless of their political ideology broadly, which is essentially like Israel can do no wrong. Every situation, what their actions are justified, et cetera, et cetera. And my argument was that, if you have concerns about the viability of Israel long term, this is what you're doing by not holding them accountable for now is the greatest threat to the existence of Israel that could be. And I'm not even talking, as a Jewish state. I'm saying like existentially, because it seems to me that the where this goes is that you get this type of dawdling by a Democratic administration. Maybe there's another 4 years of a Republican administration after this. I mean, I'm 4 or 5, 10 years out, 20 years out, that we at one point, Israel will be, I don't know what, like I say, when it will be as, if not more so, isolated than South Africa was. But the level of belligerence and this dynamic that you're talking about, where you have many Israelis going like, we don't see the problem here. I really worry about what that's going to look like 20 or 30 years if we're on this path. And they are isolated, like in a dramatic fashion, with, legit enemies around them, some anyways, that like when you wake up in the middle of the night and have this fear, like what does that fear look like to you?
Well, I think just the last days have been a real rude awakening. This is Hamas, okay? What they've managed to do already, just to paralyze life, scare Israelis. This is an organization which doesn't have a state, has a long-term blockade imposed on it from all directions. There are real limits to what you can smuggle through tunnels from Egypt into Gaza. Is basically making its weaponry in home factories. I mean, the idea that, Iran is bringing great shipments in, how? I'm sure people are gaining some expertise from different places that they've been trained, but this is 2 million people in a tiny space, which Israel has under massive permanent surveillance, and this is the disruption they've managed to cause. Asymmetric warfare should be, should be something that Israel at least pauses and says, is an exclusively military solution really the way forward? And this carries over to, for instance, Israeli opposition to the Iran nuclear talks, to the JCPOA. I have argued that Israel, and I again put impunity front and center here, that maximum impunity has been a terrible guide for Israeli strategic thinking. And, you know, I'm used to people saying to me, oh, come on, the Israelis, they're super smart. And I know lots of super smart Israelis, okay? And there's lots of super smart people from all kinds of places. But nationally, if you're treated in this way, you can make some really consequential missteps. And I passionately believe that Palestinians should get equality and get justice. But I sure as hell don't want to see Israel go the direction it's taking itself in. I want Israelis to be living in a country that A, doesn't treat Palestinians like that, but B, has a future, whether it's a future in whatever political dispensation. That's not what matters right now. What matters is that they are making some very serious miscalculations. The idea that they will cling on to America indefinitely, the idea that they can win exclusively by force, the hubris to think that the other side will always be inept, and Palestinian agency is a big question here. Eventually, the Palestinians will have to revive and renew their politics. But other surrounding countries, the idea that in Al-Aqsa, that's the image you want to broadcast to the entire Muslim world, of Jews dancing and celebrating in the Western Wall Plaza. I don't know if people have seen this image. Yes. It's worth looking up. As Al-Aqsa wasn't on fire, but there was smoke billowing from a small fire from the Al-Aqsa compound. How's that going to work out well for you? So I do come at this from a place of, please tell me, anyone who says, I'm picking on Israel, it's a Jewish state, why don't you stand up for Israel? Please tell me how this works out well for you as someone who claims to care about a Jewish future in Israel.
We just have a couple minutes here, but let me just ask you this in terms of, Netanyahu's political future and give people a sense of what you think happens with Netanyahu. And does that really fundamentally make a difference at this point? Right. I mean, there was a time where we could talk about a really viable sort of option to the right in Israel, but it doesn't really feel like the range of politics is almost maybe more narrow there than it is here in this regard.
Way more narrow. It feels like almost one large Jewish nationalist party across the spectrum with a couple of minor but noticeable differences. Netanyahu has, in this conflict, appears to have just played a get out of jail card in actually the literal sense of the term, because he's on trial right now. And the overnight news from Israel is that the attempts to form an alternative coalition which would oust him have collapsed. And the momentum has shifted in his direction. It doesn't mean he can form a coalition, but right now he is re-strengthened, and many Israeli commentators are saying that there is a causal connection between that and the escalation we have witnessed. But more importantly, yes, Netanyahu is the longest serving prime minister. When he goes, there will be some fluidity, some change, some unpredictability, but this goes so much deeper than Netanyahu. It is not about the person of Netanyahu. It is about rebuilding a progressive camp in Israel. You cannot have a progressive camp without a robust critique of the regime that it is trying to change. And you cannot have a progressive camp without incorporating the Palestinian citizens of Israel. There are some great individuals in civil society, Jewish and Palestinian, in that country working to change things. There are a couple of decent political leaders. I personally think the current leader of the Labour Party has a lot going for her. But she's going to have to shift her politics significantly and build on the wreckage that has been inherited. And it's about having a trenchant critique and a values-driven also realistic. It's about being a progressive realist in the Israeli context.
Daniel Levy, thank you so much for your time today. It was great to talk to you again. I wish it was under different circumstances.
It never is.
I feel like we end every one of our conversations that way. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks,
All
Emma.
right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Finish up the week. Always good to catch up with Daniel Levy, and he is a former diplomat, and is speaking to a very often, I think, to a broad audience, but also his audience is that he speaks to is one that is supportive of Israel, and so in the most general sense. And so we've had very interesting perspectives on what is happening this week. And hopefully, at the very least, in the short term, the level of violence, at the very least, drops over the course of, well, I would like it. I mean, if it were up to me, there would be a lot of different things that would change in the next 24 hours. But at the very least, my heart goes out to the people who are under siege right now. And so we should just say that as we wrap up the week for our Peacock viewers. For them, for Emma and I, we will see you on next, on Monday, right? That's over the weekend.
I think that's how it works.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you guys for backing me up on that whole weekend concept. All right, we will see you on Monday. And for those of you who are still with us, we're going to have in just a moment, we're going to bring in Noah Culwin. Alinos on the IM. Remember, you can IM the show via the app at majorityapp.com. You can also support the program. Oh, you get the app at majorityapp.com. You can support the program by becoming a member at jointhemajority.report.com. We'll wait for Emma to get back before we bring on Noah. But Alinos asked me, Sam, you're measuring societal change based on the feedback you get on Twitter? Really? I'm not measuring societal change on that, but I am measuring the discourse amongst where a lot of the media get their sense of what the discourse is. People get so narrow in their assessments of things. I mean, the broadly speaking, I don't think society cares too much about this. Our society, but most politics are largely fought, amongst 10 to 20% of the people, 5 to 15% of the people. And a part of that politics, a big part of it, is a function of conventional wisdom and what the media says. And Twitter, as much as any other sort of, I guess, I don't know, place or space, influences the perspective of what the media, sort of perceives is going on. So
Yeah,
I'm
social
not-
media has its faults, but it definitely impacts things significantly.
yeah, and it's also, I mean, you can measure itself against itself, right? I mean, the idea that it may not be, I'm not saying there's a one-to-one relationship with what's going on, but broadly speaking, trends that you see on Twitter are not divorced completely from trends that are going on in society. So, you know, I mean, it's conceivable that Twitter has gotten to be a much more friendly place to the plight of the Palestinians and the rest of society, to the extent that there's any opinion. It has moved in the other direction, but I find that hard to believe. I find that hard to believe. So, all right, let's go. Want to welcome to the program Noah Culwin. He is the co-host of, or I should say, the co-creator of Blowback, entering into its season 2. Noah, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Here with Emma Vigeland.
How are you,
and-
Noah?
Doing well. I'm doing well.
Now, full disclosure, and I don't even know if you're aware of this. So it's also full disclosure, and it's also enlightening you. But your show advertises on our show, or has in the past. You know, via Stitcher, I guess.
Yeah.
So I feel like I should just say that up front, so that I'm not accused of some type of pay for play type of situation.
Well, I was paying you to play, so this is a revelation to me in that sense.
Right.
No, but appreciate the disclosure. I was yeah.
And then you will get a DM from me looking for a kickback.
Yes.
That's the way this works. That's the way we do this around
Yes,
here.
it's exactly as simple as everybody on Twitter thinks it is.
So all right. So last time, you guys did a season 1 of Blowback was about Iraq. And this time, what is it about?
So this season is about the Cuban Revolution and about the American government's attempts to stop it, which continue to this day. The frame of our story, the time that it takes place, is, we do in the same way that we did with the first season, which was about the Iraq War, in the same way that we did, a couple episodes of prehistory prior to the invasion, or at least prior to 9/11, actually, not the invasion. We do something similar here, where we give a bit of a deeper dive, and then we sort of tell the story of the revolution. And the idea being that, I think, in to put it in the simplest way, providing a counter history to the conventional narrative about what the Cuban Revolution was, who the people that carried it out were, and what Cuba is today, and what our relationship with it is.
And we should
Our
say,
meaning the American governments.
and when you say we, you're talking about Brendan James, your
Yes, my co-host Brendan. Brendan does all of the producing and editing and sort of the sound, the sonic components. We both write and research it together. But I do some more of the interviewing. But we're a 2-man show.
All right. So what is you tell me what the myth is? I mean, what is like, if it's a corrective in terms of the history, what is the sort of widely accepted story that is wrong?
So the story is that basically there was this guy prior to the Cuban Revolution named Fulgencio Batista, and this very popular broad revolution emerged to dislodge him. And then that revolution was betrayed by its communist leaders in the form of Fidel Castro, who then turned Cuba into a closed totalitarian society that can be characterized by poverty, cultural backwardness, and general sort of, weirdness and isolation that we tend to associate with, enemy regimes in this country that our government designates, like, North Korea, for example. And that is, I think that is sort of like the canned story. And then there's like these sort of addendums that come into play about, like, well, who are the Cuban American? What is the Cuban American community? And, what is America's ongoing governmental policy toward Cuba, and so on? And sort of what are the base kind of frames that we're sort of operating with?
And so I mean, broadly speaking, I mean, people need to listen, right, to the show, but broadly speaking, what's wrong about that? What part do we get wrong about that history that you've just outlined? Batista was there. He was horrible. But what do we get wrong, broadly speaking?
So I think, like, the first thing is to, Brendan and I have sort of, Brendan especially, as somebody who sort of clued me into this more seriously, about, like, the sort of original definition of the term neocolonialism as defined by Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana. And basically, neocolonialism is sort of a good kind of very general term that you can use to describe the process by which, as older Western powers were decolonizing, the American-led order was able to create new systems of control and domination in their place. And so the real story is that in Cuba, America sought unsuccessfully to guide the revolution in a particular direction that would accommodate American interests, after having propped up Batista and many previous iterations of Batista, other dictators. And once Castro decided to do things as the leader of the revolution, such as a real aggressive land reform policy, nationalizing American-owned businesses, and a whole host of other social and economic reforms that were a little bit too socialistic for the American government, even if Castro himself did not identify as a socialist, though, of course, his brother was known as a communist, and Che Guevara was in the leadership, and so on. So, there's this idea of the Cuban Revolution as a fundamentally malevolent force, when in reality, as somebody said on a podcast that I was on this week, I thought was a good way of phrasing it, it was actually like a second war of independence. Traditionally, the Spanish-American War is thought of as like Cuba's War of Independence, because that's when the Republic of Cuba was created. But really, the Cuban Revolution was an act of separating Cuba from this colonial system where it churned out sugar and provided raw materials for the Americans, who also owned all the other parts of Cuba, like tourism and so on. And, it was a declaration of independence from that. And I think sort of then the next phase of our show is about all of the awful things that America resorted to in the subsequent years, up into, the threat of nuclear annihilation, to keep a hold on Cuba.
And we should say, right, it was Martí in that first independence.
Right. He's the canonical figure. He's like the
George Washington of
and he died in the course of that. And he's sort of famously his there's a wonderful group of journalists based in Havana now called the Belly of the Beast, which is named after a quote of Martí's, because he said that he had lived in the belly of the beast, as he had lived in America prior to the Spanish-American War. And he understood that while in the short term, there was a, no nominal alliance between the Cuban, nationalists and the Americans against the Spanish, that eventually it would be the Americans, who would be the next, as Muqtada al-Sadr might have put it, as we said in the first season, the Great Serpent.
Did the U.S., what was the U.S. disposition towards Batista? I mean, they weren't, I mean, I know that they were, that they thought, the United States at that time, foreign policy was, hey, Castro is somebody that we can work with. And then they started to like, hey, wait a second, why are you doing this? No, you're supposed to be our client type of situation. But what was it that was the breaking point? Was there a breaking point for the U.S. in terms of Batista? Or was it like, oh, we can't stop this train, so we're going to try and guide it?
It's a bit of both. So it's funny because basically, while the earlier part of the Eisenhower years are sort of marked by this really aggressive policy of covert action and regime change, like we see, most notoriously in Guatemala with the overthrow of the Guatemalan president, Jacobo Arbenz, by the CIA, By the end of the 50s, however, John Foster Dulles has died. And Eisenhower, he famously gives his exit address about the military industrial complex, which is less like a prescient warning and more like a very muted preemptive apology, for what it's worth.
Sorry, guys, you let the government get out of control with the
it's like
military. So I just want
like you were like Supreme Allied Commander. You're like the highest. You're like, of all the guys who've ever had medals on their chest, like you have the most. Like, what do you talk? Like, you know what I mean? Anyway,
right. I'm sorry about what I did, but I would like to go down the history books as the guy who pointed it out. So
right. So by 1959, it is understood, and the American government is basically, they have offered Batista a way out. They're like, you've got to like transition this thing, and Batista resisted. Because Batista's government was itself, there's a very, the American mafia had a lot of interest in Cuba. But as we say in our show, the biggest racket of all was the Cuban government itself. And Batista, profited immensely from that, billions of dollars in today's money. And so obviously he was resistant to let go of his racket. And so by the time the revolution had become, was clearly gaining steam and had captured popular imagination in the international press, as well as the support of, huge, like the urban population, as well as the rural peasantry. The writing was on the wall toward the end of 1959. And so it's very famously, as you see at the second Godfather, New Year's Eve, 1958, everybody, gets shuffled out and Batista flees. He's not allowed to go to the US because they're like, we gave you an out, dude. And he said no. And so then, their first impression of Fidel is like, all right, you're the guy, like you're the most popular figure in the country. Everybody looks up to you. You have made a lot of bold promises, and we're not going to rule out that you're somebody that we can guide. And so you have a lot of initial contacts in the course of 1959. Like, for example, Fidel goes on Ed Sullivan when he comes to the US in 1959. By the time that visit happens in the spring, it's already sort of clear that like Fidel is not the Americans guy. And Eisenhower does not visit them personally, but Nixon does. And, there's this souring there. But like, the CIA caught themselves very flat-footed. There's a very famous meeting of a guy who was later involved in the Bay of Pigs where he says he met with Castro and was like, this guy, anti-communist all the way. And, which is, as we all know, is totally correct.
Yeah, well, right, but I think he at that time was just like, look, I realize that somebody has to be my patron, and I got to see which one is going to allow me the most space to be my patron. I think that was his perspective.
It's interesting. Like, I think it's a little bit like, I think that's just a little bit the cart before the horse, because I think it's more like he looked around him and was like, the only way that we're going to make Cuba the place that I said it was going to be for this movement, and that we all agreed, and the July 26th movement, was a part of, giving land to the people, taking over industry. Those things inevitably put it on a course of conflict with the US. Right. There was not really like, I don't think that Castro really ever had a choice, because the things that the Cuban Revolution did that emancipated its people functionally and literally, it also naturally put them on a course for collision with the US. It was sort of, the agency was in the American government's hand as to, what relationship Castro might pursue, assuming that he had, would want to remain like, officially non-aligned as he had in the early days.
All right, I got something for you that you may not know from your fancy schmancy podcast.
Oh yeah,
you ready for this? What was when he came for that UN talk? How did the Secret Service or whoever was providing the security detail? What was Castro's code name that they used to describe him?
I did know this, but I've forgotten.
Sugar One. Gives you a sense of what they saw the value of Cuba at that point was.
Yeah, really. That's a very good and telling detail. It was a monocrop economy at that point. It's the sort of like, it's as classic an example as you get of it.
I've told a story. My ex-wife did a documentary down there. So we went down there in, I guess it was 2002, and we're there for 4 or 5 weeks shooting. People can find it. I don't know how they can find that documentary, but it was about photography in Cuba. And we interviewed interviewed some of the folks that Castro enlisted to tell the story of the revolution in pictures. Corrales, we interviewed, I don't know if these names, but I cannot remember the name, who took the iconic photograph of Che that is on all the t-shirts, but his assistant was alive when we went down there.
Whoa.
And so the spent a lot of time with him, and Corrales was the guy who took the photo of from behind Castro as he's looking out on everybody in the square. That you're aware of. But
I mean, it's really cool the way that we were able to interview Cubans for the show, and we were able to, we've since, as the show has come out behind our paywall on Stitcher, we've been able to talk more and more with people who are in Cuba or who are Cuban Americans, with people who know people in Cuba and who wanted, an alternative version of the story to be presented in some digestible way. And I think one of the things that's been really exciting as part of that, it really just has been this process of, like getting to know Cubans and these people and see it for their island from their perspective in a way that you just don't get to see here. And the fact is that this is recent enough history that, as you literally experienced, the people who were there,
right,
who did these things and participated, many of them are still alive and have some really amazing stories to tell. And it's a very recent phenomenon that you can directly communicate with people on the island with tools like WhatsApp and so on.
Well, was there anything that in your conversation with the Cubans, was there anything that challenged maybe your assumptions about Cuba? Did you find stuff that, I mean, I think obviously the whole, the series is about challenging the sort of easily digestible history. But was there anything that you found? So you had a certain skepticism to that, but was there anything that you found in the conversations about Cuba that you found challenged your assumptions?
I think one of the, it's a really good question. I think one of the things that I found more that challenged my assumptions in talking to Americans than necessarily in talking to Cubans. I think in talking with Cubans, the stuff that really was sort of, because with Cubans, I went in with a more open mind. I really tried not to make a lot of assumptions because Brendan and I, our research process is that, we spend 6 months reading books and talking to some people, but steeped in kind of research, but not in, we're not authorities on this stuff by dint of grad school or whatever. And so I think, with that, you sort of have to, to me, it was really important to not have assumptions. And so a lot of, I think, our views that we come to in the show were, if anything, animated and informed by the combination of what we sort of read, from both, not just mainstream and alternative sources, but, primary documents and from those conversations. And then with the Americans, it was a lot of, just learning about the different ways that our government could act that you didn't think that it could before. And I don't just mean nefariously, just that our government is a very, even at that high level and during that era, was this very strange and weird thing that was documented really thoroughly in a way that our government isn't now. And you can learn a lot about it. And it was a very exciting thing. And that was revelatory for me. Just the history of it was very fun.
The way the government functions. I mean, I have to say that my experience down there, again, this is 20 years ago, and so we're only 7-8 years out from when, and I think Cuba was just getting over the shock, essentially, of the fall of the Soviet Union, because they were devastated by
that.
And
I think to illustrate what that means, just to flesh that out a bit, it was since 1962, when Kennedy initiated the embargo, Cuba is not allowed to do trade functionally with the U.S. government and any American allies. And so, in a lot of ways. And so when you think about what that means, then when, all right, in a bipolar world, when one of the powers that was your buddy disappears, what happens overnight? Cuba, which is a country with limited natural resources and not really it's not it's not like Germany, it's not like France, it's not a country that like should something like that happen to, the rug get pulled out from under it, as Germany did, it could, come together. That wasn't that wasn't an option. And so the Cuban, it was a period of increased repression, as commonly understood, the special period in the 90s, but it was also, a direct cause of the continuation and intensification of the American war on Cuba during that time as well. And it's an incredible thing that Cuba came out of it. It was
a lot of deprivation and a lot of austerity.
Yeah, and needless, like entirely a consequence, because it just
entirely a consequence of the ability they didn't have the ability to do trade with this massive engine of trade that is 60 miles, 100 miles off their coast. Essentially,
90, man, it's 90 miles from Florida.
Well, 60 to 100. I mean, I got it. I got within that.
I mean, I'm a man of precision. You see,
I understand. Well, I mean, that is the thing. And I also it was interesting. There were both things that surprised me in terms of what you'd hear in the United States in terms of how deprived people were, but also there was a decent amount of propaganda there, and there were people who were a little bit afraid. I accidentally put the production on the radar of the Ministry for Counter-Revolution by having a conversation with a guy in flip-flops and a tank top, and all of a sudden we were being followed. There was a statue that was just down from the American annex, which I thought was fascinating. I've told this story many times, but it also made me very, very sensitive to the propaganda we were seeing in this country, because this was in 2002. So I came back from there like in February of 2002, I think it was, I can't remember exactly. And to a country that was in full on propaganda measure. I mean, it was nuts. And
I mean, we covered this in our show, but 2002, John Bolton gives a speech at the Heritage Foundation saying, we have reason to believe that Cuba has the capacity to develop, biological weapons, and which was a bullshit vacuous amorphous statement, because he was saying it that the Cubans would have the option and capacity to do so if they so chose. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, blah, blah, blah. They've never expressed an inclination. There had never been an accusation. It was total bullshit. And he says this to a room full of right wingers. Then when he gets subpoenaed, or he's asked by, Chris Dodd to go before the Senate, Colin Powell says no. Colin Powell tells Dodd he can't have him. And so he sends a scientist. And this is in the beginning of the first episode of the new season, but it's there was an active, and this is as the rafts are coming, it's on the heels of Elian Gonzalez. There was a really, it was active then in a way that I think we're actually starting to see a little bit now, unfortunately.
Right. And I mean, it was also, I meant the propaganda just broadly about 9/11, you could see reflected down there. Yeah. But in terms of Elian Gonzalez, there is a statue that is I don't know, maybe 500 yards from the American annex or whatever it is. They didn't call it the embassy at the time because we didn't have formal relations. And it's Marti. And it is, it's got that copper sheen where it turns green, and the base was made out of cement, and it was crumbling. And so he's holding a baby, and he's got his arm out pointing at the embassy, essentially, basically saying you can't have my child. And you go up to that statue, right? And this is 2002. The child he's holding is Elian Gonzalez. They have made the statue that couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old look like it's been there for 100 years. It was fascinating. You could see, they had purposely denigrated the cement, and they made it look like it was 100 years old. And they had brought, Marti 100 years into the future.
This is a very, for many Cubans, this is a very sensitive issue for a couple of reasons. So for one thing, I will say we will have as a bonus episode of this season an interview with Jose Pertierra, who was the lawyer for Elian Gonzalez's father, as well as an advisor on the Cuban 5 case. And Jose is fucking awesome. And it's going to be a great interview. And I'm really excited to get that out. So second, it's a sensitive issue because in 1960, after the Cuban Revolution succeeds and after the American government sort of openly declares its hostility, formally, it culminated, like they severed ties. Eisenhower severed ties in January 61, like 2 weeks before Kennedy takes over. And but at the beginning of 1960, it's the beginning of a more subtle but gradually intensifying effort. And one operation that was a CIA plot administered by Americans and American sympathetic Cubans was who are mostly upper class, was called Operation Peter Pan. And it was basically they spread stories and active disinformation originated with the CIA, acknowledged in various declassified records and so on, and journalistically. And they told parents look, your children are going to get sent to Soviet totalitarian relocation farms, and you're not going to see them again, and that's what Castro is going to do. 14,000 children, in not that big of a country, go to the U.S. are separated from their parents. And because of the nature of just what Cuban diaspora politics are, what they are, many of those children have grown up and said oh yeah, I'm happy to have made it to America, but those were children who were separated from their parents. And there are a lot of them who did suffer. They were in foster homes. They suffered severe trauma, to say nothing of what happened to their family and the absence that they experienced their family. So then when you flash forward to the Elian Gonzalez case, which is in brief, just, a woman and her boyfriend, who is a coyote, take their son, with whom she does not have custody, away from his school, and then puts him on a raft with her. Everybody dies except for him. Miraculously, he survives. For whatever reason, American authorities decide to give him into the custody of family that he's never met. And in America, the story is that we're sending him back to North Korea, to Hitler. We're sending him back to Hitler. And it's not this story of oh no, this is just the latest effort of the Americans to take our children. There's a very there's another side.
His dad lived in Cuba.
Yes, his dad was
a custody battle.
It was a custody battle, and this father was, I'll let Jose talk about his client, and Elian's father, but this was not a case of there is not a single defensible part of what she did. And the story that we tell in America is one that is centered around the American 2000 election, and it is centered around the angry exiles, both of which are things that are real dimensions of it. What is never talked about is how you could view the Elian Gonzalez case as yet another example of the extent to which the American government is willing to prostrate itself to fuck with the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban government and the Cuban people, again through their children. And it's a very that's how I would put it.
It is so hard to express how much of a big deal this was in this country. I mean, it was like the second sort of there was a couple of these during that time, but it was OJ and then Elian. There was people in the streets and around the house, surrounding the house. And when, Janet Reno was a household name because of, it was the insanity of that time. I don't know. I guess it's, I don't know.
Well, but it's not it's important that we not yes, that was that time, but there's a lot of continuity with today. And I think that's important to point out. So, for example, I think that one of the things that people don't know about is that the National Endowment for Democracy, which is, the private organization through which the American government gives money to support things like Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, I think, but I know it's for sure Radio Free Europe and other, what they would call American information services, but are effectively American propaganda, of varying quality and severity. And we still to this day pay millions of dollars a year to support anti-Cuban government propaganda from Miami that is effectively keeping on the dole a bunch of, like right-wing Cuban exiles. And, this is, people have for years been saying, oh, there's a new generation of Cuban Americans, things are changing and so on. But like, there's, it's people who are arguing along those kinds of demographic or generational lines are not making a serious argument, because what is still there is this infrastructure that continues to amplify this stuff and all of the noxious political incentives that gets everybody from the mayor of Miami, it's a figurehead position and he's a Republican shitheel, but he's still an influential guy, that gets everybody from him to Bob Menendez, always so riled about Cuba. It's not dissimilar to the Israel lobby, which is, where I spent the other majority of my journalistic career, reporting on and developing authority. They are functionally the same way, in the same way that all lobbies are. And I think it's important to recognize that this view that we have of Castro and our policy, it's not from time immemorial. It's shaped and maintained by an active set of interests.
Noah Culwin, thank you so much for joining us. Folks want to hear the Blowback. They go to what, Stitcher?
Yes. So I can do the pitch this time, so you don't have to.
Well, you can. And I just want to say this before you do. Apparently, Cuba is 94 miles from the Florida Keys. So, I mean.
Okay, fine, whatever.
Gotcha.
Fine. Whatever. Gotcha. We'll talk about it later.
I got my gotcha.
Anyway, you go to Stitcher.com/premium, and then you sign up for a monthly plan with the code Blowback. Now, here's the thing. It will tell you that you're just getting a week free. That's a lie. You're actually getting 5 weeks free. There's a glitch in their system. So you're supposed to just get a month, but actually you're getting 5 weeks until they fix it. Then you're just getting a month. But
they can't fix this?
I listen, man, I don't make the rules. I don't make the technology. I'm merely a purveyor of fine content. And in that role, I'm telling you, I want to maximize the gains of this audience. And signing up for Stitcher obviously helps support the show.
We can also use the code majority.
Right. I forgot. You can also use the code majority.
Yeah.
Please use the code majority.
Use the code
gracious
majority
enough to have me here.
Yeah, exactly. Let's make it like we just had to, like, why do we get this bump? Because they don't know that you're on here. We got this huge bump on Friday.
I mean, it's and listen, it's if you go and listen to Blowback with that code, it's great for us anyway.
Yeah, there you go. Of course. And folks will forgive you for that, you being 4 miles off. So.
I mean, if it puts me on
Apparently
your
that
blacklist,
wasn't in
I
one
understand.
Of your books that you read.
Yeah. Ooh. Oh. Oh. I'm gonna have to sit with that one, man.
Noah, thanks so much for your time today. Folks can check it out. Go Stitcher.com, search for Blowback, use the coupon code majority, get secretly 5 weeks off.
Thanks, man.
All right, thanks for coming on. Say hi to Brendan.
Bye.
All right. Emma had to drop out. I didn't want to talk to Noah. Emma was here. I just didn't.
Well, I mean, clearly I didn't want to talk to him either.
There you go.
So.
Yeah, we can get it.
Emma has strong feelings about the Cuban Revolution.
We'll go into the
They've got
fun
a
half.
Jersey rivalry too, the two of them.
Obviously.
We'll go in the fun half, and Emma can talk about her corrective to their corrective on the history of Cuba and the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I was off camera, but I got the mileage exactly right. So
there you go. Boom. Folks, just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. When you become a member at jointhemajority.report.com, not only do you get the free show free of commercials, you also get the fun half, and you keep this show trucking along. Despite the fact that we do this pay for play shit like we did with Blowback.
Trucking.
There you go. Also, don't forget, check out Nomi's show, youtube.com/The Nomiki Show. And remember, you can watch us on YouTube, on Twitch. My understanding is we got a level 3 hype train on Twitch today. So we got that going for us. Oh, total poggers. You kidding?
Yeah.
Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
Yeah, last night, David and I on Left Reckoning had Matt Huber on to discuss two of his pieces. First, in Jacobin, rich people are fueling climate catastrophe, but not mostly because of their consumption. Basically, It's nice to hate rich people because of their yachts and stuff, but really it's their relationship in production that we should really be focused on. And also, there's still no shortcuts to climate change. And then we reflect on, sort of all the Michael Brooks people have been seen in the timeline in the past few days with regards to his statements on Israel, Palestine. And we kind of talked about that a little bit. So check that out last night, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Also, I am going to Twitch stream probably tonight at Literary Hangover, twitch.tv/Literary Hangover. So check that out.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
yes, it is
Yes, he's here with you now.
the fun half.
Fall under his spell of ums and ahs. Lull you to sleep.
You know your mic is on, right?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 509 area code. Just going to take 4 or 5 calls today. If you're on the lines, that's it. You guys are it.
Talk about cancel culture.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
Is this me?
Ronald Reagan, I presume.
Hello.
Yes.
Mitt Romney. Remember that?
Yes. Hello. Who let the dogs out?
This is Ronald Reagan. How are you?
I'm glad you called. Thank you so much for the grotesque amount of cookies that you sent last week.
You're welcome. But then
I
heard that you gave them
loved-
all away, so
I love the sadism there, Ronald Reagan.
There's something really hilarious to me. If we can break down the joke for a minute. Sam, you seem really sort of serious and disciplined and in control of things. And I just love the idea of you completely losing it over a box of cookies. So
I mean,
very funny about
I did we talk about this on air the other day? Like I brought up from downstairs. I said, I was like, it said to the guy down who gets the packages, I'm like, give these away. Find the kids, give them away. It's a big building. Give them away. And I brought up one container and I said, Emma, take these
one
out
human
of
container.
No, one
cookie container.
One cookie container
to put into your human container.
And exactly. And I said, take these cookies home. You must take them out of the office. I'm having only one. And then she turned her back and I had eaten 3. And that was it. Like literally turned her back. And I would just like shove 3 of them in my mouth and then left. And they're big cookies.
he told me later, and I thought maybe like he, like a true, addict, lied about the amount that he was doing before he walked out the door. But it was really just one. Then I sit down to do work, and then he shovels 2 more in and then leaves. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just picturing a literal cookie monster situation with the crumbs flying all over the place. Just
I don't let the crumbs fly.
Sweater vest just covered in.
Yeah, I don't let the crumbs fly. I get every crumb. So what do you got for us aside from, for whatever reason, trying to carb me up for Suns Out, Guns Out?
Oh yeah, what did I call for? Well, two quick things. One, I really appreciate your coverage of the Israeli-Palestine issue. I have like a vague memory of my mom just sort of saying growing up, like, all of that seems complicated. And like, that was the only thing I ever learned, like ever, about that situation, other than growing up religious and having this vague idea that like Jesus was going to come back one day and fix all of it. Those were like the 2 things I was ever taught about that situation. So it's actually been, I'm like a grown up now, but very, very educational and important. So I wanted to thank you for that.
I would add, I did an interview with my buddy Benny Bruner back in 2013. Was it February 11th, 2013? You told me the other day, Brendan. February 12th. Oh yeah, it's on YouTube. Benny did a film called The Great Book Robbery, which you should watch, actually. I think if you Google it, you'll find it. For people who say that there was when we talk about the original Nakba, which Palestinians consider to be like this tragic day, essentially, but it wasn't quite a day, but where they were dispossessed. For people who say there was no Palestinian society at that time, this movie makes the case that there was, based upon the theft of about 70,000 books, if I remember, from Palestinians living in I think it was around Jerusalem, but throughout the country, and they're actually being held in the National Library. It's pretty fascinating, and it's worth checking out. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. I remember you talking about that on the show once a while ago. But and then last thing about Cuba, for my senior project in college, I majored in Spanish translation. I went down into the dusty bowels of the school library and found the speech that Castro gave in Central Park. It was like a little pamphlet in 1959. And so that was my final project. I translated that speech. As far as I know, it's the only English translation of the speech Castro gave in Central Park in 1959. And if you want to read it, I'll email it to you.
That would be great.
Cool. Have a good one.
All right. You should post it in the Discord, dude.
Yeah, dude. I'll do that, dude.
All right.
Cool,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. That's what you do to babies.
You know,
losing it.
Yeah. You okay?
Yeah.
Speaking of losing it, CNN has unearthed a posting that used to be on social media, and it is of Marsha. What's it? Marsha Taylor Greene? Is that her name?
Marsha Clark.
Marsha Clark. What?
No, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay, sorry.
Just a little OJ throwback.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, wait, wasn't she the prosecutor? Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, to be fair, now she is just doing something that is like bat crap crazy. But to be fair, this was 2 whole years ago, 24 months ago. We've all done things when we were younger that we think like, oh, I wish I hadn't posted that to social media because that would be crazy. But here she is paying a visit. Like, you wonder about this like ongoing obsession she has with AOC, right? This is not new. Remember, AOC is a congresswoman from New York, from North Brooklyn and Queens. And at this time in 2019, she was far more well known amongst conservatives than any other cohort in this country because of Fox. And so that explains a little bit of this. And so she's not in Northern Brooklyn at all. And
no.
that explains this. So Bronx and the Queens.
So anyway, wait, okay. So at this point, just quickly, Marjorie Taylor Greene must be running for Congress. Maybe decides, I mean, it's 2019.
Right.
Or deciding to run. She got elected in 2020. Okay. She's on the pinnacle of her run, whatever the case may be.
No, she's not. She's just at the beginning.
At the precipice is what I meant. Yeah, right. As we've established, I'm losing my mind today. And so I guess she wants a tour of her future workplace and decides to pay a visit to somebody who may be her colleague at some point.
You want to talk to Crazy Ocasio? You come to this little thing and you open it up and you whisper into her. Session. This is confession. This is Ocasio confession right there.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'm an American citizen. I pay your salary through the taxes that you collect from me through the IRS because I'm a tax-paying citizen of the United States. I'm a woman. I'm a female business owner. And I'm proud to be an American woman. And I do not support your socialist policies, and I do not support your murderous abortion policies. As a mother of 3 children, I'm appalled at New York's law for abortion, and it needs to end, and it needs to stop now. You're bringing God's judgment on our country, and I'm against it, as well as my friends. So you need to stop being a baby and stop locking your door and come out and face the American citizens that you serve. If you want to be a big girl, you need to get rid of your diaper and come out and be able to talk to the American citizens instead of us having to use a little flap.
It's kind of like hers.
They don't seem to understand what a mail slot is.
Right. I mean, that's not.
Video.
They made this thing so that people had to speak through it, and
so,
it's just
so we could talk to socialist Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, that's not. It's not some way to communicate with her. That is where
I'm seeing the AOC flaps in front of more and more doors, and it's starting to make me think cancel culture is a real problem.
You know what's amazing too is
socialist slots.
Very likely they're not in the office. But even if they were, like, I mean, if I saw those lunatics out there, and I remember now she's been in office. She got elected in 2018, right? I mean, so she doesn't get to office until 2019. Do we know exactly when this video is from?
I mean, I think we just know 2019. So
she's been in office at the most, like, probably several months. And she's got these lunatics who are, banging on her mail slot. Her office is not right by the door. Like there's a
waiting room
area, and there's a waiting room, and there's a, the congressperson's
February
office.
2019.
So this is a month after she's been sworn in. A month, and this lunatic is there. Continue.
I quickly, I love the idea that Ocasio-Cortez was actually in there, right? I love that, like, she probably wasn't. That's why her door was locked. And also because they were major security concerns, because the lunatics like Marjorie Taylor Greene are obsessed with her. But like, she's just writing something down, trying to do work. And she just hears this woman, Ocasio-Cortez, change your diaper.
Oh my God.
Sam.
She's like, she keeps flapping her gums.
Flappy.
Okay, well,
This is like child games.
This is child games.
Child games, indeed.
Oh, child games, you know.
Hello there.
Hello. This is like, pause it for 1 second. This reminds me like when my brother would have friends over and I'd be in my room like trying to do what I was doing and they'd be like continuing to bother me.
Annoying your sister who's having a sleepover or something.
Exactly. But here's the best part. I mean, talk about the projection. They're saying child games. Look at where they go to this next, where they like what they start saying, like, it is creepy that she's locked herself in this thing. Like, listen to this. This is unbelievable.
I hear you in there.
This is creepy.
It's hide and seek.
This is, huh?
That's creepy.
This hide and seek. Tag, you're it. Guess what? You can't stay in there forever. Can you come out and play? Let's go.
Yeah, so creepy.
Right, I guess she got the message.
Hold on, pause it. She's the creepy one. She's the creepy one for being in her office and someone acting like a character from Saw or It going, come out and play. I like the serious commentary on that is that it's super rapey, but
can't imagine why AOC might have been terrified when these people breached the Capitol building. But go ahead.
If you want to come to visit the socialist, communist,
You're a very good artist.
I'm just trying to decorate, you know?
This is her book where we sign it.
This is her signing book, and I'm just signing it.
Immature child.
okay, I'm sorry. Pause it again. You can go back a little. There's like a 70% chance they're drunk. I just heard them talking.
Oh,
I
think
it seems like something like, you know, like a kid does in high school where, like, you know, sophomore year, they have their first peach schnapps and then they go TP the the kid they don't like's house.
Let's put glue in her lock.
You know what this is? This QAnon stuff is just those ghost hunting shows, but now those people are applying it to politics. Instead of wandering around abandoned hospitals and scaring themselves when they see something flash past the light or something. Now it's just, we're going to do that about politics on a mass scale.
Go ahead. Let's just finish this up.
We sign it.
This is her signing book, and I'm just signing it.
Immature child.
Should we draw a wall?
Yeah.
Oh, no way, dude. We really want to draw a wall. So let's draw what a wall looks like, everybody. This is a wall.
This is a wall. She's the one playing child games by being in her adult's congressional office as they want her to come play hide and seek.
2 points. One, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't seem to have a notion of that Congress people don't make the laws in their various states. So when she's talking about New York laws and this and that, the other thing is that, yes, you can say it's juvenile that they drew a wall in the book and wrote funny sayings, but to their credit, they did not draw a penis. And that I would have anticipated, like that would have been
that we know of.
That's true. Fair enough. That would have been like the third grader version of what they did, which is just slightly, they did the 7th grade version.
Well, I mean, that would be obviously very anti-Christian because they're there to critique her New York abortion policies.
You can't stay in there forever. Oh, it's so creepy that she's hanging out in there.
It's so creepy that she's not responding to us sticking our tongue through her mail slot. That we don't understand what that is. They really thought that that's like how the constituents are supposed to talk to her, get on their hands and knees and put their mouth through this and talk to her. They don't know the concept of the, well, obviously.
I don't know. I think.
Yeah, I mean, but that's why I think they were drunk. Like they weren't grasping basic things. They day drank and then they decided to, you know, play a funny prank on Sandy Cortez.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 201 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam.
Hey.
Hey. Hey, my name is Brian. I'm calling from Kansas.
Brian from Kansas. What's on your mind?
Oh, not much. I just wanted to, thank you for all the, what you guys have been talking about Israel and what's going on there. One of the things I saw this week that was kind of disturbing was, the violence that's going on within Israel.
Yep.
And, like in the city, there's a couple different cities, but the city of Ramla, which I want to say is, somewhere between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. We were there a couple, I don't know, 6 years ago or something like that on a trip. And, it was one of those trips through, my wife was working at one of the Jewish agencies. And it was like a trip for people that it was basically couples, and one person, there's one person converted or something like that. And, it was kind of a trip for adults to do like birthright or something like to have a similar kind of
right. Okay.
experience. And we were in Ramla, probably one of the last days we were there, and it's such a mixed city. It was, you have Arabs, you have Jews, you had people from Ethiopia that were, I guess they came over. When was that? Like the 80s?
There were two. There were two rounds. 80s was the first, right? It was a second smaller airlift in the late 90s, I think it was, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we met like the kids of that, airlift, like, and they just kind of described just how, just kind of how it's stable, but like not really stable, like living in that type of community was, and it's just kind of, like they managed to make things, last for so long, and just to see kind of things coming apart, it's really sad. It's just, I don't know, but I just really appreciate all your coverage. Long time listener.
All right. Well, thank you for the call. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
There was always a lot of racism relative to the Ethiopians who were airlifted to Israel, Ethiopian Jews. And part of it was just sheer racism. Part of it was also, it was just harder to integrate people coming from Ethiopia, let's say, into Israeli society than Russians who were coming into Israeli society, because there were more like culturally and just sort of like infrastructure wise and language wise, Israel is more sort of European in its orientation. So even like, bathroom facilities, if, the people who were airlifted, the Falasha, they were known as, in Ethiopia, were in the first round. And then it was the Falash Mura in the second round. We're coming from very, very remote rural villages. And so, they were stepping into a completely different world. Ethiopia, of course, is not the, at the time anyways, I don't know now, one of the poorest societies, countries in the world. So there was a big culture shock, but it was also, there was a tremendous amount of racism too in the context of Israel, which, you know, I think probably, particularly based upon what we see in terms of the treatment of Palestinians, not that surprising, but one should be like, you know, I mean, there it was, and it grew, right? It grew because there was this competition too between Russian immigrants and Ethiopian immigrants as to who was going to get who were going to get resources. Speaking of which, white supremacy, Matt Walsh still on the beat. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, all you hear in the media, all you hear from the Joe Biden administration, white supremacy this, white supremacy that. Well, I got news for you. According to Matt Walsh, that's a distraction from the genuine threat to this country, black supremacy.
Anyway, going into more detail, Garland went on to claim that, quote, the top domestic violent extremist threat we face comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race. In other words, says Garland, the greatest threat we face comes from violent extremists, but not the ones who've been rampaging through our cities, inflicting billions of dollars of damage, blocking traffic, harassing innocent people, and attacking random bystanders. Those extremists are often racially motivated themselves, but they're not the ones we should be worried about. Instead, according to the people at the highest levels of government, the racially motivated extremists that should attract our attention are the ones who aren't doing anything and are nowhere to be seen. Black supremacists can whip up a mob of thousands in an instant and terrorize cities for weeks on end. White supremacists can't do anything close to that, probably because they're hampered by the fact that they don't exist for the most part, which is a little bit of a logistical challenge I have found. If you want to do something but you don't exist, it presents problems. This is a threat that guys like Garland have fabricated. Now, perhaps they really are up at night, frantically tossing and turning, screaming, no, the white supremacists are coming. But I doubt it. The people who invent the boogeyman don't actually believe in it themselves. It is more that they are politically bound to this conclusion.
That's an interesting assessment of what it takes to create a boogeyman. But be that as it may, 2017, this according to the Brennan Center, the FBI had created a domestic terror program category it called Black Identity Extremism Movement. An FBI intelligence report cited 6 unrelated incidents over a 3-year period, averaging of 2 incidents a year, in which black subjects not associated with one another attacked police officers to allege that a terrorist movement driven by perceptions of police brutality against African Americans existed. The report stated that the perceived unchallenged illegitimate actions of law enforcement will inspire premeditated attacks against law enforcement by so-called black identity extremists, suggesting that the FBI's concerns lay not in illegal police violence, but the hypothetical retaliation it might provoke.
But Sam, the FBI is traditionally, historically, always downplayed the threat of black people and kind of put it off to the side. So,
of course.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really trust them. They were aiding and abetting the civil rights movement back in the day, which, by the way, Walsh's commentary here, indistinguishable from what you might have heard back during Malcolm X, Black Panthers, Martin Luther King. The real threat is black supremacy. At least update it, dude.
There have been so many just mass shootings over the past several years involving white supremacy that I want to just see. There is, the El Paso, the one in South Carolina. There's just so many examples that
it's also like international, like Wellington, like Christchurch, but also Anders Breivik. Like, this is who's doing that stuff. I
mean,
like, when it's ideological and like there's a manifesto, like the Black Lives Matter protests aren't black supremacists, I should say. Like I was at a couple of them. I'm not a black supremacist.
So you say.
I am anti-white, but
Richard Holzer. I mean, I'm just like randomly Googling this.
Well, 2021, far-right groups are behind the most U.S. terrorist attacks report finds from the New York Times, obviously liars. White supremacist groups have carried out a majority of terrorist plots and attacks this year, according to a report by the think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Newsweek, here's a list of suspected white supremacists accused of domestic terrorism in 2019. Richard Holzer, 27, wanted to poison and bomb a local synagogue in Pueblo, Colorado, in order to expel the cancer that is the Jewish community. Patrick Crusius pled not guilty in October to capital murder charges for a mass shooting in El Paso Walmart. Connor Betts, he killed 9 people, injured 27 others in a Dayton in an assault style rifle with an assault style rifle in Dayton, Ohio.
And this 2020 report, by the way, the Department of Homeland Security was raising alarms about far right extremism back even during the Trump era. The independent people were. And this report that I just cited, this was updated in 2021, but published in 2020 during the Trump times. The Center for Strategic and International Studies found that white supremacist groups were responsible for 41 of the 61 terrorist plots and attacks in the first 8 months of this year, 67%. So 67% of the attacks in the first 3/4 of 2020 by white supremacists, but they don't exist.
And all of these black supremacists have the ability to whip up mobs within moments. Within moments, these black supremacists who it's weird. It's nice that they're showing such restraint.
Did you see the camera just reset?
Yeah, I don't know why that
I don't know what just happened.
I would just say one thing with regards to tracking down white supremacy is, I think it's better, for instance, to be going after white supremacists than black identity extremists. I would also like an emphasis placed on white supremacy infiltration of things like the police and the FBI itself, because that's actually what I'm more concerned about.
Speaking of such things, there's a court case against the Proud Boy leader, Ethan Nordine. And it's fascinating. This is after the January 6th insurrection riot in the Capitol building. I don't know if you've seen that footage of that body cam by that cop who was knocked unconscious, and pretty disturbing video. Here is though some documents or some graphs from documents. Apparently this was from this guy's, I don't know, emails, or if it was from his chat or something. And prosecutors revealed these, and it is showing that, and I don't know if it's something he broadcast on their Slack channel or their Telegram channel, who knows what it is, but well, the prosecutors know what it is. But he writes, all right, I'm going to say it. F Trump, F him more than Biden. I followed this guy for 4 years and given everything and lost it all. Yes, he woke us up, but he led us to believe some great justice was upon us, and it never happened. Now I've got some of my good friends and myself facing jail time because we followed this guy's lead and never questioned it. We are now and always have been on our own. So glad he was able to pardon a bunch of degenerates as his last move and shit on us on the way out. Fuck you, Trump. You left us on the battlefield bloody and alone. And why this is interesting, I mean, yes, it's
who could have seen it coming? Who could have seen it coming? That
he's such a loyal guy.
Yeah, I mean, that guy, he just oozed trustworthiness.
But it's hilarious and it's funny, and I'm enjoying that part of it. But there's also something really important to understand here. These guys at least these guys in the Proud Boys, and some of them. And I've heard it secondhand, so I won't repeat it, but somebody who knew one of these guys and had a conversation with them prior to this that was cryptic at the time became clearer after January 6th. There was an understanding that these guys had that they were going in not to protest, but to literally change the outcome of the election. That literally Trump was going to take over, that they were the shock troops gone in, and that there was going to be another wave that were going to come in. I don't know the details of it, but they thought what they were doing was not a protest. They thought there was going to be a material change in the leadership of the government on that day.
They'd be the first domino.
And they were the first wave.
The storm is coming. That's the QAnon lore. And they had a guillotine, or not a guillotine, but a noose set up. What's the word for it? But outside of the
gallows.
Gallows, yes.
The bottom line was that these people who stormed that Capitol, at least some of them, thought this was not a performance. They thought this was a coup. And the fact that it didn't happen, we don't know what part of this, how much of this, whether it was like just poor planning, whether there was an assumption that certain things would happen that didn't happen, whether some people said like, I'm not doing that. I mean, we don't know why it is that what these guys thought that they were there to do didn't happen. But the danger is, A, minimizing what they thought was going to happen. B, ignoring what the Republican leaders did or didn't do in that moment that encouraged this. Because there's no reason to think that it's not going to escalate from here. None. Zero, none. There's no reason to think that something like this couldn't happen again under the right circumstances in the near or mid or long term. I mean, that's the thing about this, that downplaying it, I think, is why it's problematic.
Well, the Republicans have made it clear that they will be using this fervor and this, aggrievement of a stolen election to propel them to victory in 2022 in the midterms.
Yeah. They're going to try. All right. We don't have much time. Sorry, folks. We're not going to get to any more calls. Well, we'll take one more call. Calling from a 484 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Ben. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ben. Where are you calling from? Where are you calling
Western New York, sir. Western New York. Other side of the state from
Western New York, like out near Elmira or something like that?
A little further, sort of like Buffalo, but I'm in the edge of Appalachia, Cattaraugus County.
Okay. What do you got for us?
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting in a school right now. I'm a social studies teacher here, and I had kind of a perennial question for all of you, which is New York State's curriculum. Sam, you got kids in the public school system, don't you?
I have two.
Okay. What do you guys think about the kind of, and I just really know the high school curriculum, but we do global studies the first 2 years, US history in 11th grade, and like a government economics in 12th grade. And I just kind of wanted to know your thoughts on that curriculum. And if you think, just kind of an open-ended question, like, do you think it's adequate in terms of preparing kids, or at least giving them a sense of history and kind of the world around them? Should we have more of a focus on global history, more of a focus on US? I teach the global, and it is, it's challenging to teach 9th and 10th graders kind of world history from the Paleolithic to the present. We do it over 2 years. So I don't know, I'll just kick it to you. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the curriculum. Should we have more of a focus on US history? Should we integrate the US history into a global curriculum? Because what I'm noticing is in my global class, there's a bit of American exceptionalism at work.
Yeah.
We don't really talk about the U.S. despite it kind of looming in the background of everything. I mean, we do, but it's kind of bizarre how they're split in half. So I don't know, I'm curious as to what you think about that, and anybody else in the whole crew there who's got some input or thoughts.
I mean, look, my high school experience was really just about making fart noises in the back of the class. I mean, that was, for the most part of that, but almost exclusively for me. But, and so, but the things I've been most impressed by have been stuff that my kid in elementary school does that is multidisciplinary. You know what I mean? Like, so they'll work on like a project about birds, but it's their way of like learning geography and their way of learning biology and their way of learning natural sciences. And it cuts across things. I mean, I would like to see, and my daughter, when she went through junior high, like they raced through history. I mean, I guess I've come to understand history is something different than just like memorizing all these dates. And so I almost would prefer to focus on like one or two eras and go across, the globe and understand these things so that you understand the concept of history rather than actually learning certain specifics of history. But
I feel like somebody at the state level is kind of tried to do that. I'm sort of fresh here. I'm coming into this after years working in agriculture, so I'm not like fresh out of college or anything. I'm entering in my 30s, but I think the state has tried to do that. In the past several years for global, they've kind of changed the curriculum around, and it's much less like, memorize all this stuff, and it's more, analyze the point of view, analyze the context of this, piece of writing or this speech or whatever. So they're attempting to do that, but I agree with your assessment of just like ripping through with your daughter's junior high.
I mean, that's, and I don't really have a sense, like, my daughter, like this year's been so screwed. My daughter's getting great grades, but she says to me, like, I'm not learning anything. And it's just, it's really disturbing. But, I at this point, like to have a teenage kid, I'm just, I'm happy that she's safe and, mentally okay, relatively speaking. You know what I mean? Because I think there's a lot of kids have been really, it's been very difficult for them. And, for her, particularly her, she'd been training for this her whole life. The idea of maintaining social relationships through a phone was like, that, she'd been training for this, and it was sort of in some respects, just because of what her issues are, this was, not as difficult for her in some respects as it was for other people. But I mean, for me, if I was to one of the things that I've heard from teachers is that the standardization, the high stakes tests, in many respects took the ability of teachers to like create their own curriculum, or at least shape it in the way that they wanted. And I think that's super unfortunate.
Yes.
And I believe that, like, for me, I would like to see kids in high school learn the concept of history more than the history. Like, here's a book, read it over the summer. It's like it's better in my mind to learn the concept of these things. The most, and I didn't get introduced to any of that until college. The idea of like, read critically, like, find out what their assumptions are. And it's super easy to find out what their assumptions are just based upon what discipline they're writing from. You put a sociologist, a psychologist, a historian, a, political scientist, and you have them all write on the same topic. They're starting with different assumptions just based upon what their discipline is. And that's going to affect the outcome of their book, let's say, and sort of, or whatever they write. And, to teach that concept to people, when you're high school students, if you can get that concept, like understand that concept, then it's so much more important than the specific details, because then as they grow older and bump into these things, particularly in the world that we have now, right? Like, just we had those guys on from Blowback. Like, it's 6 episodes, and I don't know how many episodes. I think it's 6. And you're going to learn that history, and if you have the frame of mind of how to interpret that, what you're hearing, that's what really matters, particularly in this world where, like, the access to, I listened to a Yale professor's Civil War class, which I could never do, 30 years ago.
Sure.
And, and because I have a better sense of history now, that hearing those details made a lot more sense. So that's, I don't know.
Well, I feel like a lot of what we're doing here is very antiquated, and it's been kind of updated slightly, but there's a lot of compartmentalization between disciplines, and the multidisciplinary stuff that you saw your child doing, I would love to do here, but it's just like the way that the course is constructed, and we have these regents exams that, as you say, dictate everything. And, I wonder if they're going to go, we have not had them this year. We obviously didn't have them last year. So I wonder if this is it. This could be like, the close of those things.
That would be cool.
There are people
that would be
considering
cool, but we'll see.
But I also realize that my question is, pretty meaningless right now in the context of, remote learning. It's a perennial question I kind of had for you guys, partially because your show, I do feel like, is a bit of a social studies classroom in and of itself that, has way more impact than what I can do. So I appreciate the work that you guys
Thanks.
do
I
for
appreciate
it.
the work
And
you do.
I do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the work you do, but I have to end the show now.
Well,
Thanks,
why
man.
don't you take the weekend then.
All right.
Nice talking to you, Sam.
Good
Take
talking.
care.
Good
Thanks
luck.
for your time.
Thanks for the call.
Do we got time, or you got to end it?
What's that?
Do we got time for me to weigh in on that, or are you going to end it?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to read some IMs too, but I just want
So yeah, I think it's like, as an educator, his focus would be more on the content. I think to zoom out a little bit, the best thing about school is that it gives people a time free of having to go work to invest in their brain. And I think you basically just need to extend that structurally. So like extend school through the summer, for instance, for kids at lower grades. Don't make people have to work for college. So make college just another place where you can go get bored in school. And I think those sorts of changes will have way more effect than trying to refigure the actual content. Because I think it's the structural things that are really weighing people down.
I think that's a good point.
Matt always talking about the structural things.
Rampaging
correct.
Toaster. Sam, it'd be totally poggers if you joined Matt for some Rocket League doubles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sam, you unappealing dick stick. You look like a syphilitic gibbon. Do you come from human parents, or are you the product of color beige miraculously taking human form? Putting on grandma glasses, filling out a shirt in any and every way unflattering to the shirt, and somehow exuding the energy of a 100-year-old and a 10-year-old at the same time. Anyone looking at you probably thinks, well, of course this guy has Benjamin Button disease, but F knows how far along he is. Anyway, I love the show and wanted to ask, have you considered getting Mark Maron on again? I know he's an old friend of yours, and I imagine his comedy following would help boost your viewers. Thanks and very much love. First of all, I've been on Maron's show. He's been on this show. No bump. 0 bump. But yeah, I got to get him back on soon. He's busy.
I think that appearance on Maron kind of got me to start listening back in the day.
Really?
Yeah, I can't remember if it was that or Best of the Left first, but like those around the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to make an effort. Particularly during COVID, it was extremely hard, and I had a couple of invitations that I think fell through the cracks. But now I'm trying to be like, make sure I say yes in a timely fashion, and then figure it out, and go on more shows. I'd like to get Maron on. I'll text him and see if he wants to do it. Sunday, last time he was on, I think we had him on actually. We had him on during COVID, right?
He was on. Yeah, he was on briefly during the election coverage.
Right.
Oh,
he called
yeah.
in, and he was a little bit. He doesn't want to get caught up in politics. I think I'm not as much anymore, and so I mean I think he's.
Wonder
he's
why?
still,
It's really fun.
Yeah, well, he doesn't, but okay. I'm going to jump through a couple of these. Kurotaki, speaking out is completely and utterly worthless if there's no action. Well, yes, but it is they're not mutually exclusive, or I should say, you're not going to get action without people speaking out first. It may not necessarily, let me put it this way. It is necessary, but insufficient. And so the fact that it's happening is important. It is insufficient, of course, but this is the way things change. I got news for you. There's not going to be any action that the U.S. government is going to take regarding Israel with the absence of Congress people not getting to the floor and speaking out. That's just not going to happen. It's not. There's no guarantee, and I would bet, if I had to bet, that the Biden administration is not going to do anything anyways. But this whole thing of like, it's just performative. I mean, that's just absurd. It's just an absurd understanding of how anything changes anywhere. It's also an absurd understanding of who has the power and in what context. It's just absurd. It's just absurd. And that's it. So I get really frustrated by that. The way I've reached 5G Superstar, the way I've reached tribesmen about reality in Israel is showing them that Israelis do not consider non-Israeli Jews to be their equals. Even if you move over and take citizenship, especially noticeable if you're a Slav and not Hasid, given their open support of anti-Semitic parties and militias across Eastern Europe, essentially using as a source of cheap non-Arab labor and desperate fresh bodies to populate settlements. Just look at Bibi's support of Azov and Ukrainian far right, who have actively paraded in their granddad's SS uniforms. Once you break Israeli nationality from Judaism, the blanket solidarity really starts to crack. Yeah. Sam Schmieder, an ethno-state can also be a democracy without the kind of ethnic cleansing Israel has engaged in since its founding. The only way this ends with a single democratic state that almost certainly means the end of Israel as a Jewish state, and people need to come to terms with that. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, I think that's why you heard Nora Ericat refer, or you hear people refer, I don't know if she did, but you hear people refer to Jewish Israelis. I think that is a first step in trying to reframe the population of Israel so that people understand there's Jewish Israelis and there's Muslim Israelis, or there's Christian Israelis. There's
also, I think even John Kerry accepts that point about like needing to be more accepting, right?
Maybe. I'm not sure. Black Marxist, do you think we overstate progressive position popularity? AOC Omar underperformed Biden and Paul Jean Swearingen really underperformed Biden in populous West Virginia, which would be the model for this. Love the show. Yes, I do. Well, I think we overstate the popularity of people who express progressive ideas. I think if you take the ideas individually and they're not associated with the with progressives, and I don't think this is something like, oh, progressives just need to dress it up in something different. I don't think that's the case. I just think that our system is such that you are demonized in certain areas if you are progressive, and or how, however you want to call it, leftist, progressive, whatever it is. And so $15 minimum wage can pass in Florida, but there is no person who you'd need an incredibly talented politician, far above the median average politician that wins as a Republican, to win, who supports raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And so I don't think it's a question of like, well, if people just stop talking about it this way or that way, they're going to be okay, because they're going to be demonized in that fashion anyways. I think it's really going to get down to just like who can mobilize more of their voters at any given time. And And so I think there needs to be more, and there needs to be more convincing of people on the urgency of these things. I mean, I don't know what else to say. See, I mean, look at, Missouri voted to expand Medicaid, and the governor's just like, F it. 6-time award-winning show. Did Sam Seder just accuse other people of being too narrow in assessing things? Bruv. Marv from Iowa. Excited to be finally a Majority Report member. It took some real hard thinking, sitting down with the family, looking at the budget to see if we can make this work. Finally, Ron Johnson really put money into a way that I could finally grasp. So I drove the bank, asked for 10 very crisp $1 bills, drove home, stacked them on top of each other, measured them with a yardstick. After all, it was a no-brainer. Did you know it only cost 0.043 inches to become a member? Thank you very much for that. Oi, oi, oi. Okay. 3 more. Coach McGurk. The Grateful Dead are totally poggers, my dudes. Okay. That was not what I expected. Illuminati kids. This clip outside of AOC's office is the worst live action adaptation of Attack on Titan I've ever seen.
I think I get that one, actually.
And the final I am of the day of the week. Run PMC says, wow, Sam, even making the Cuban Revolution about your divorce. Shameless. All right, folks. Emma, Matt, Brendan, great job this week. See you on Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know